When the first shots rang out in 1861, neither North nor South was fully prepared for the war that would come. The conflict would demand far more than soldiers. It would demand money, resources, and the will of entire populations. Abraham Lincoln would face the unprecedented challenge of mobilizing a fractured nation, redefining war aims, and holding together a divided home front. Today, we'll explore the mobilization efforts of the North and South, the transformation of the Union's war goals, and the way Lincoln wielded his wartime powers, culminating in one of the most famous speeches in American history. Let's get started. At the start of 1861, the U.S. regular army was shockingly small, just 16,000 troops. Lincoln immediately called for an increase of 23,000 in the regular army, but he knew most of the fighting would fall to state militias, filled with volunteer soldiers. Those volunteers came in large numbers at first, but enthusiasm didn't last forever. By March of 1863, Congress had passed the first national draft law in U.S. history. All young adult males were eligible for conscription, but there were ways to avoid service. You could pay Congress $300 or hire a substitute to fight in your place. The draft sparked anger across the North. Laborers, immigrants, and Copperheads, Democrats who opposed the war, saw it as unjust. The tension boiled over in July of 1863 during the New York City Draft Riots. When the first draft names were read aloud, violence erupted. For several days, largely Irish Catholic rioters attacked Black Americans and middle class Protestant whites, whom they blamed for the war. The violence left over 100 people dead, most of them rioters, and several Black Americans were lynched. The chaos only ended when troops restored order. When the Southern states seceded and formed the Confederate States of America, they faced the daunting task of funding and manning their own war effort. Raising money proved difficult. With limited success in borrowing and taxation, the Confederacy turned to printing their own money, $1.5 billion worth by 1865. The result? Runaway inflation. Prices skyrocketed to 9,000% compared to an 80% rise in the North. Like the Union, the South first relied on volunteers, but by the end of 1861, enlistments were falling. And in 1862, the Confederate Congress passed the Conscription Act. It required all white males ages 18 to 35 to serve for 3 years. Enslaved black men and women were forced into non combat roles: laundry, cooking, manual labor, and a small number of both enslaved and free black men fought in combat roles. When the war began, Lincoln's main goal was not to end slavery, it was to preserve the Union. His stance was clear in an August of 1862 letter to Horace Greeley. Lincoln wrote, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it." Lincoln personally did not disapprove of emancipation, but he knew most Americans were not yet ready to make that the purpose of the war. That shift began in 1862. In April, radical Republicans abolished slavery in Washington, D.C. In June, Congress banned slavery in all U.S. territories. A month later, in July, the Confiscation Act freed all slaves owned by those aiding the rebellion and allowed the president to employ black Americans as soldiers. The turning point came after the Union victory at the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862. With morale slipping, Lincoln reframed the conflict, not just as a fight for unity, but as a moral crusade against slavery. On September 22, 1862, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that as of January 1st, 1863, all enslaved people in states in rebellion against the United States shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. It did not free enslaved people in border states, and in practice, it immediately freed no one. But it was a bold strike at slavery as an institution, not just rebel property. It invigorated Northern morale and prevented European nations from recognizing the Confederacy. Lincoln used the powers of his office aggressively. He sent troops into battle without asking Congress for a formal declaration of war, arguing that the conflict was a domestic insurrection. To deal with opposition in the North, he authorized military arrest of civilians and suspended habeas corpus, the right to a speedy trial. More than 13,000 people were arrested without trial, many unjustly, as it later turned out. Lincoln's administration worked hard to keep public support. Pro war pamphlets, posters, and songs acted as propaganda. Matthew Brady's corps of photographers documented the grim reality of war, publishing images of mass death to show the scale of sacrifice being made to preserve the Union. One of Lincoln's most powerful persuasion tools was his own voice. On November 19th, 1863, at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg, just 4 months after the battle, he delivered the Gettysburg Address. In only a few minutes, Lincoln captured the war's new meaning, a struggle not only to preserve the Union, but to bring about a new birth of freedom. From the first volunteers of 1861 to the shifting war aims of 1863, Abraham Lincoln's leadership was defined by adaptability and resolve. He faced riots in the streets, legal challenges to his authority, and the staggering human cost of war. Yet, he steered the nation toward not only survival, but transformation. The Civil War began as a fight to keep the United States whole. By the time it ended, it had also become a fight to make it better. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.